He raised his glass of wine, looked me straight in the eye, and said the words I'd rehearsed hearing my whole life. But not like this. "You don't deserve this company." Right there, in the middle of Thanksgiving dinner, with the turkey still steaming and my mother pretending not to hear, with my brother smirking from across the table like this was all some well-executed joke, and with my heart pounding so loud, I thought the crystal in his hand would shatter from the vibration. I didn't say anything, because I couldn't. Because if I had opened my mouth at that moment, I would have either screamed or cried. And I promised myself I would do neither. Not this time. Instead, I placed my napkin gently in my lap like nothing had just exploded inside me. Like my father hadn't just humiliated me in front of my entire family and our closest family friends. Like he hadn't spent the last 3 decades grooming me for a role he had now decided I was never meant to have. They all kept eating, as if he hadn't just ended an era, as if the betrayal wasn't printed across every wrinkle on his aging face. But I saw it. I saw the relief in his eyes. Like he'd finally said what he'd been thinking for years. Like this had been sitting on his chest, and now that it was out, he could breathe again. And maybe that's what hurt most. Not that he sold the company, not even that I wasn't included, but that he looked lighter afterward, happier. Like cutting me out was freedom. You want to know what hell feels like? It's sitting at a long oak table, one you helped sand and stain during the office remodel when you were 16, surrounded by people who used to change your diapers, take you to ballet, call you the future of the family, and suddenly realizing none of them ever really saw you as anything more than decoration. Because if they did, someone, anyone, would have said something. No one did. And still, I smiled. I cut my turkey, took a sip of my wine, bit down so hard I thought I'd crack a molar trying to hold back the scream burning in my lungs. Because I knew something they didn't. Something that hadn't quite happened yet, but was coming. And when it landed, it would shake the same ground they thought I'd just been buried under. But let me rewind. Because you need to understand how we got here, how this wasn't just about a business or an inheritance, or even betrayal. This was personal. It always had been. My name is Amelia Wren. I'm the only daughter of Richard Wren, founder and former CEO of Wren Tech Industries, a logistics and supply chain empire my father built from scratch, with sweat and sharp elbows and a ruthless sense of timing. He used to say the company was his 5th child. It was only ever me and my brothers, but he always counted the business as one of us. Honestly, sometimes I think it ranked higher than we did. I grew up in boardrooms. My lullabies were inventory forecasts and supplier reports. While my friends were learning to braid hair, I was learning to decode balance sheets. While my brothers played baseball, I was sitting at the foot of my dad's office chair, listening to him close deals worth more than most people make in a lifetime. And when I say I gave everything to that company, I mean everything. I missed proms, birthdays, anniversaries. I canceled vacations. I lived out of a suitcase for months, flying to god-awful trade expos, pitching to buyers in windowless hotels, negotiating shipping routes across Europe. I gave it my 20s. My health, my marriage. I was supposed to be the next in line. Everyone knew that. Until I wasn't. And the only clue I had was how quietly things started shifting. One day my keycard stopped working after hours. They said it was just a new security system. The next, my projects started getting rerouted for approval. Then my father stopped inviting me to executive meetings. Eventually, I wasn't even included in the press release announcing his retirement. I found out about that from a former intern who texted me a screenshot and a confused, "Did you step down?" But I stayed silent, because I needed to be sure. I needed to know if this was just his pride or something deeper. Turns out, it was both. Which brings us back to Thanksgiving, when he finally said it out loud. "You don't deserve this company." The sentence hit like glass against pavement. Shards went everywhere. He didn't look up from his plate when he said it, just casually, as if we were talking about the weather. Like this wasn't the very moment he was rewriting our family history with a single sentence. I looked at my mother. Her eyes dropped. She knew. I looked at my oldest brother. He shrugged, like he'd already moved on. And maybe he had. Maybe they all had. Except me. Because while they were busy playing politics in boardrooms I was playing a different game. And the next move? Well, it was already in motion. You see, what my father didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I'd started something months ago. Something small. Something quiet. Something powerful. And when the ink dried on the deal he'd made, when the champagne was popped and he smiled like he'd won, he didn't realize he'd just handed the family legacy to the very person he thought he cut out. Me. But we're not there yet. Not quite. Let me tell you how this story really started. Because it wasn't at Thanksgiving. It was the night I stopped believing my father saw me as anything more than a placeholder. And that night changed everything. I used to think my father loved me in the way only a man like him could. Quietly, practically, efficiently. Not with words, never with softness, but with legacy, with access, with training. Other daughters got dolls. I got Excel spreadsheets and warehouse tours. And honestly, I loved it. From the time I was 11, I started sitting in on his Monday logistics calls. I'd curl up in the corner of his office, sketching on legal pads while he barked orders into a headset. His voice never wavered. Always sure, always sharp. He used to reach over and tap my notes to correct numbers, without even looking. I worshipped him. Rentec was more than a business to me. It was proof that I mattered. That I could be someone powerful too. That I wasn't just the daughter or the girl in a room full of heirs with Y chromosomes and golf trophies. I was the one who stayed late, who asked questions, who noticed the weak points in the supply chain before anyone else did. At school, I was the weird one who skipped parties for pivot tables. But I didn't care, because my dream was clear. One day, my father would hand me the keys to the company, and when he did, I'd take it further than even he imagined. We never said it out loud, but I could feel it in the way he trained me, in the way he walked me through contracts at 16 like I was a junior partner, in the way he let me shadow investor calls, attend trade conferences, and review acquisition reports on flights while my brothers were busy chasing internships they didn't even want. Everyone assumed the company would go to my oldest brother, Jordan. Even Jordan assumed that, but I was the one who bled for it. I remember one night in particular. I was 25, fresh out of business school, and he flew me with him to Singapore for a tense negotiation with a stubborn regional distributor. It was brutal. 3 days of posturing, walking out of meetings, bluffing. On the last night, we finally got them to budge. I was half asleep in the hotel bar, sipping flat champagne, when he looked over and said, "You've got instincts, better than your brothers." He didn't say it with warmth. He said it like he was commenting on the weather, but I held on to that moment for years, because it meant I was seen. My mom always told me I was too eager to prove myself, but I think she just didn't know what to do with someone like me. All sharp lines and ambition in a house that preferred polite smiles and golf outings. She was soft, beautiful, elegant, the perfect executive wife, always smiling just enough, always hosting perfectly. But I could see the wear in her eyes, like she'd swallowed her voice a long time ago and never really got it back. And maybe she saw the same pattern growing in me. Maybe that's why she warned me. Don't expect too much from your father, Amelia. He's not built that way. But I did. I expected everything. The cracks began quietly. A new assistant was assigned to me without my approval. She was good, but green, and clearly more loyal to my father than to me. Then a major report I compiled was sent out under my brother's name, with no explanation. I confronted my father. He shrugged. "You'll get credit where it counts." Another time, I noticed the numbers on a new merger didn't add up. I flagged it, loudly, publicly. I thought I was doing what he taught me. Speak up, protect the company, lead without fear. He pulled me aside afterward, expression tight. "You embarrassed Jordan in front of the board. We don't air issues in public." "But the numbers were wrong?" I said. "That's not the point," he replied. "We present unity. especially when investors are watching. That was the first time I felt something shift, like I'd crossed an invisible line, like I wasn't just an employee or even a daughter, but a threat. Still, I convinced myself it was just tension, growing pains, succession stress. I kept showing up, kept delivering. There was a night a few months later, a shareholder gala. I'd planned it, hosted it, even secured the keynote speaker. At the end, my father raised his glass during his closing toast and said, "Let's thank Jordan for organizing such a seamless event. Future leadership is looking bright." I stood there, champagne flute in hand, the smile frozen on my face. I looked at Jordan. He didn't even flinch, just nodded, accepted the credit, and let the applause roll over him like he'd earned it. That night, I went home and cried in the dark, not because I needed the applause, but because it felt like my father had chosen a side, and it wasn't mine. Still, I stayed. I kept believing, because that's what daughters do when they grow up needing to prove they were more than a placeholder. And deep down, I still thought, maybe if I just do more, try harder, achieve bigger, he'll see me again. The last real conversation we had before Thanksgiving was in his office. I'd just finished a year-long restructuring of the warehouse logistics that saved the company nearly $4 million annually. I brought the reports, charts, hard data, ROI projections. He didn't even look up from his laptop. "Leave it on the desk," he said. I paused. "That's it? What do you want, Amelia? A medal?" I blinked. "No, just maybe a thank you." He sighed, finally looking up. "You always need so much." I left the papers, walked out. And in that hallway between the conference room and the elevator, I made a quiet decision I never spoke aloud. I was done trying to be chosen. That's when the idea started forming. Soft at first, like mist. What if I stopped fighting for a seat at their table and built my own? What if I took everything he taught me, everything he underestimated in me, and used it to create something of my own? I didn't know exactly what it would look like. Not yet. But I started sketching it. Nights, weekends, calling old colleagues, reviewing NDAs, mapping contacts. And then one day, I got an email. A random, vague proposal from a private equity firm looking for partners in a discrete acquisition of mid-sized logistics assets. The target? Rentec Industries, my father's company, my family's legacy, my almost future. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I sat in silence for a long time, reading it over, again and again, until a single thought crystallized in my mind, clearer than anything I'd ever known. This isn't betrayal. This is alignment. And maybe, just maybe, it was time for the student to test the master. The email came on a Thursday. It was short, 2 lines, no greeting. Rentec has been acquired. Effective immediately, all former executives will be briefed during Monday's internal realignment call. Thank you for your service. That was it. No phone call, no heads up, not even a signature. Just silence, followed by a full stop. I must have read it 10 times before my vision blurred. My hand hovered over the keyboard, unsure if I should forward it to someone, to Jordan, to my assistant, to my dad. But what would I even say? "Hi, just wondering if anyone was planning to tell me that my entire life was just sold off like clearance inventory?" I didn't move, didn't blink, didn't breathe, just sat there in my office, which, I guess, wasn't mine anymore, staring at the blue glow of the screen like it might rewrite itself if I stared hard enough. It didn't. I closed the laptop. Then I stood up, walked to the window, and watched the city go on like nothing had changed. Like I hadn't just lost the thing I spent my whole life earning. I called him. Of course I did. Even after everything, some part of me still believed there had to be an explanation. A miscommunication, a misfiled document, something logical that would make all this go away. He didn't answer. Straight to voicemail. So I drove 45 minutes across the bridge to the house I grew up in. Past the private golf course, down the winding hill, up the cobblestone driveway where my name still hung in cursive script on the mailbox alongside everyone else's. The door was open. As always. I walked in. He was in the kitchen, sipping coffee, reading the paper like he hadn't just detonated everything I'd built. "Dad?" I said, trying to steady my voice. He didn't look up. "I got the email." Still nothing. "I wasn't even told," I said. "You didn't think I deserved a phone call?" He finally looked up. Expression blank. Voice calm. "You don't work here anymore, Amelia." Just like that. Like we were talking about weather again. Like I hadn't sacrificed relationships, holidays, years of sleep and self-worth for a dream he let me chase like a carrot on a stick. "You sold it?" I asked. A beat. He nodded. "To who?" His eyes narrowed. "That's confidential." I laughed. It was a wild, broken sound. "Are you serious?" He set the paper down and leaned back. "You're taking this personally." I blinked. "It is personal." "You think I didn't struggle with this?" He snapped. "It was a business decision. You were emotional. Unstable. You started acting like a threat to the board. You wouldn't listen. So instead of talking to me, you erased me?" "I protected the company," he said. "From you." And that's when it broke. Not the company. Not my future. Me. Something inside me. Something old. Something loyal. Cracked wide open. And for the first time in years, I stopped trying to be professional. Stopped trying to be composed. Stopped pretending that being the good daughter would buy me a seat at the table that was never meant to include me. I walked out. Didn't slam the door. Didn't say goodbye. Just walked into the driveway. Sat behind the wheel and let the tears come in thick, hot waves that soaked my collar and fogged my windshield. I don't know how long I sat there. An hour. Maybe 2. Long enough for the sun to shift and the numbness to settle in. Grief is strange. It doesn't come in neat stages. It comes in flashes, static, sudden gasps of breath you didn't realize you were holding. One minute you're heartbroken. The next you're furious. I stopped sleeping. I stopped eating. I'd stare at my closet for hours, unable to put on clothes. Every outfit felt like it belonged to someone else, someone who still believed in something that no longer existed. The girl who thought hard work equaled value. The woman who thought loyalty would be rewarded. The daughter who thought being chosen was just a matter of time. She was gone, and in her place stood someone raw, hollowed out, vibrating with a grief so dense it felt like lead in my veins. The worst part? No one called. Not Jordan, not my mom, not even the assistant I trained from scratch, who I'd once paid out of my own pocket when the budget froze. It was like I'd been erased from the family record, like they'd been waiting for this, like I'd never belonged. And for weeks, I spiraled. I started rewriting every conversation, every memory, trying to spot the moment it all turned. Was it the gala, the merger disagreement, that one comment I made about Jordan's strategy? I replayed them all, over and over and over, until I couldn't tell what was real anymore. What was truth? What was illusion? What was projection? What was betrayal? Then came the shame. That deep, corrosive shame that creeps in when you realize you let them do it. That you stayed too long. That you ignored the signs. That you believed in people who had no intention of catching you when you fell. I'd go to bed replaying his words. "You don't deserve this company." Over and over in my head like a cursed mantra. And some nights, I believed him. Some nights, I really did think maybe I'd been too much. Too loud. Too direct. Too unwilling to play the quiet politics of legacy and male ego. Maybe he was right. Maybe I didn't deserve it. But then, one night, 2 months after it all collapsed, I found the letter. It was tucked in the back of an old file folder I'd kept since I was 16, a handwritten note from my father. Just a few sentences on Ren Tech letterhead. "You have the mind of a titan, the instinct of a wolf. This company will be nothing without you one day. Never let them shrink you. I don't know why he wrote it. I don't know if he remembered writing it. But as I read those words under the harsh white glare of my kitchen lamp, something clicked. I didn't lose myself in the betrayal. I was revealed by it. Everything that had shattered was never mine to begin with. It was borrowed, conditional, precarious, and the collapse wasn't the end. It was the clearing. I stood in the silence of my apartment and looked around, really looked, at the woman I had become through the wreckage. No job title, no board seat, no fancy office, but also no illusions, no begging, no dependence. Just me. And that was the moment the spiral stopped. The moment I remembered what I had already started, what I had built in secret, what was still unfolding beneath the surface while they were busy counting their exit bonuses. Because the company wasn't just sold, it was sold to someone, and they still didn't know who. Not yet. In the weeks that followed, I became a ghost in my own life. I'd wake up and not move. Just stare at the ceiling like the answers might be carved into the drywall. My apartment, once a pristine, curated space of routines and purpose, slowly decayed into something unfamiliar. Dishes piled up, laundry gathered like fog in corners. Even my plants wilted from the silence. I didn't know who to be without the title, without the strategy meetings, the conference calls, the pressure, the praise. Turns out, when your identity is built on being essential, the moment you're no longer needed, you feel like you've stopped existing. I stopped answering calls. Not that many came. I canceled dinner plans, ignored texts, even from the people who meant well, because I couldn't stand the pity. Or worse, the suggestions. You should start something new. You've got so much going for you. You're better off without them. Better off. Like grief was something you could schedule between Pilates and wine nights. The truth was uglier. Some nights, I drank too much. Other nights, I'd find myself scrolling job boards at 2 a.m., staring at listings like I was some clueless undergrad, as if my last name hadn't been printed on the glass of a corporate headquarters just 3 months ago. Once, I actually applied for a junior strategy role at a startup. I didn't hear back. And even though I would have turned it down, it still broke something in me, because for the first time in my adult life, I was irrelevant, not important, not remembered, just floating. I tried therapy, sat across from a calm woman named Rena with warm eyes and linen pants. She was lovely, grounded, kind. I hated her, not because of anything she said, but because she saw straight through me. "You're grieving the myth of your father," she said once. "Not just the man himself, but the idea of who you believed he was." I wanted to argue, but I couldn't, because she was right. She told me healing wouldn't look like getting my job back, or proving anything. It would look like letting go of the version of me that needed to be chosen. That sentence haunted me for days, because it meant I couldn't just fix this. I had to bury something, and I didn't know how. There was one night, late December, when I almost texted him. My father. I don't know what I would have said. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. Instead, I went onto the Rentec website. It had already been rebranded. New colors, new tagline, new leadership photos. My name was gone, scrubbed clean like I was a PR risk instead of a daughter. And that's when I saw it. A holiday gala photo. My father, standing next to Jordan, beaming under fairy lights. My mother, glowing in a red gown. A caption underneath, "Celebrating our legacy and the family that built it." I stared at that sentence until the screen blurred. Then I opened the only bottle of wine left in my fridge and drank it straight from the neck. I cried myself to sleep on the floor of my closet. That was my rock bottom. Not a dramatic breakdown. Not a scandal. Just quiet erasure. And the moment I realized I couldn't go back. Ever. Not even if they begged me. Not even if they apologized. because they'd made peace with a version of our family that no longer included me. And I had to do the same. I stopped therapy for a while, started running instead. At first, just short distances, mostly angry laps around the block in oversized sweatshirts. Then longer, through the city, through parks, up hills. I didn't run to get healthy. I ran to remember I had a body. I ran to feel something. And slowly, it helped. Not because the pain stopped, but because I could finally see it. Hold it. Understand that it wasn't a wall, but a doorway. One I'd been too afraid to walk through. Until now. It was during one of those runs that I met her. The woman who would become, in her quiet way, the mentor I didn't know I needed. Her name was Nora. She ran a local shipping co-op I'd used years ago during a Rentec pilot program. I bumped into her at a corner cafe, mid-sweat, mid-existential breakdown, clutching a paper cup like it was a lifeline. She remembered me instantly. "You're Richard's daughter, right?" she said, brushing espresso foam off her lip. I flinched. Used to be. She didn't ask what I meant, just nodded. "Your logistics model was the only one that actually worked," she said. "Still using it, actually." I blinked. It was the first time in weeks that I'd heard someone say something kind without an agenda. We talked for over an hour, and by the end, she said something I didn't expect. "If you're ever thinking of starting your own thing, I've got contacts, clients, space." I didn't say yes, but I didn't say no. And for the first time, the future didn't feel like a void. It felt like a blank page. Then, just as I started to breathe again, it happened. The false hope, the twist, the humiliation. I was invited to a conference in Chicago. A last-minute spot opened on a logistics panel. A friend had pulled strings. Said my voice was needed. Said it could be a soft re-entry. I flew out, got dressed, put on the heels, the blazer, the practiced smile. Walked into that conference room like I still belonged in that world. And there he was, my father, on stage, as the keynote, introduced as the visionary behind Rentec's next chapter. He didn't see me at first, but when he did, he didn't flinch. He nodded, like I was just another face in the crowd. Then he went on to give a speech filled with half-truths and branding fluff, crediting the company's innovative transformation to Jordan and a supportive executive family. When the panel began, I sat on the far edge of the stage. I spoke well. People clapped. But inside I was crumbling, because I realized I hadn't healed. Not really. I'd just distracted myself. The wound was still open, still pulsing. And the only way to close it was to stop waiting for him to see me. I skipped the after-party, went back to my hotel and stared out the window. Then, slowly, deliberately, I opened my email, found the thread with the private equity firm, and wrote 4 words. Let's move it forward. Not for revenge, not for validation, but because I was done. Done asking, done explaining, done waiting. And if healing meant letting go of the dream of ever being part of that family again, then so be it. Some sacrifices burn, but sometimes the fire clears the way. I didn't plan to rise from the ashes. I just stopped lying in them. It began quietly, one small decision at a time. Waking up before sunrise, making the bed, drinking water before coffee, running without music, writing ideas in a leather notebook instead of swiping endlessly through my phone. I deleted old voicemails, unfollowed my mother on social media, cut the last thread of polite obligation that had me checking their lives like some ghost of a daughter still waiting to be invited back in. It hurt, but it also made space. And in that space, something new began to grow. The deal with the equity firm moved faster than I expected. Once I gave the green light, it was like the wheels had already been turning without me. As if they knew I'd say yes eventually. I kept my name off the paperwork, used a shell firm, tucked myself behind a wall of quiet lawyers and strategic silence. On paper, I was just a silent investor in a logistics portfolio they were acquiring for diversification. But in reality, I was orchestrating the comeback of my life, not to prove anything to them, not even to reclaim what I lost, but to rebuild what was mine all along: my voice, my vision, my values. The new company wasn't called Rentech. I let that name die. Instead, I called it Embark, a blend of embark and barricade. The journey forward, protected by wisdom. It started as a consulting firm, then grew. I recruited former colleagues who'd quietly reached out after hearing what happened. Talented, loyal people who had once been silenced by the old regime. They came with open hearts and battle scars. And we built something different. We paid people fairly. We listened. We pivoted fast. And somehow, in less than 8 months, we landed a major international client who'd once been on Rentech's wish list for over a decade. We didn't just thrive. We outpaced every timeline I'd set, and somewhere in the middle of it all, I found myself again. Nora, the cafe woman with the co-op, became a steady presence in my life. Not a mentor in the Yoda sense, but a woman who'd been through her own corporate burnings and taught me something priceless. That peace doesn't come when things are quiet. It comes when you no longer need to be loud. She reminded me that my worth didn't live in press releases or board votes or my father's approval. It lived in how I showed up. Every day. For myself, for the people I now led, for the future I was writing with every decision I made. And yes, there was someone. I didn't expect it, didn't plan for it. But maybe that's why it worked. His name was Max, a systems designer we hired to overhaul our data integration platform. He had kind eyes, restless hands, and a way of listening that made you feel like you were saying something sacred, even if you were just talking about shipping delays. He never asked about my past, not right away. But when I told him the whole thing over lukewarm Thai takeout on the office floor after a 14-hour day, he didn't look at me with pity. He just said, "That sounds like the kind of fire that either breaks you or makes you unstoppable." And something about the way he said it made me want to believe it. We didn't fall into some fairy tale romance. There were no grand declarations, just consistency, presence. The kind of love that doesn't steal your spotlight, but holds it steady while you step back into it. I began meditating. Not well, at first. I couldn't sit still for more than 2 minutes without reaching for my phone or mentally drafting emails. But over time, I started craving the silence. Not as an escape, but as a mirror. That's where I began to understand just how much of my life had been spent reacting. To pressure, to expectations, to ghosts. Now, I was finally creating from within, and it showed. I walked differently, spoke slower, smiled less but meant it more. I didn't need to be palatable anymore. I needed to be whole. Then one afternoon, I got an email. Simple, to the point. We'd love to invite Embark to submit a proposal for the upcoming Rentech Global Expansion contract. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. This was it. The beginning of the circle closing. They didn't know who I was. Not yet. They just saw Embark, the rising star logistics firm that had taken 2 of their former clients in under a year. I stared at the screen for a long time, then smiled. Because I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel bitter. I just felt ready. A week later, I ran into my mother at a charity gala. We weren't speaking anymore. Not really. She sent the occasional holiday text. I stopped replying. But that night, we locked eyes across the ballroom, and she made her way toward me with her usual grace. Every step calculated, every glance careful. "You look well," she said, tone light but eyes scanning. "So do you," I replied, knowing neither of us meant it. A pause. Then she said it. "They know, you know." I raised an eyebrow. "Know what?" "That you're behind Embark. It came out last week." I nodded. "I suppose this is your revenge," she added, taking a slow sip of champagne. I met her eyes. "No," I said softly. "This is my peace." But even peace has a pulse, and mine was starting to beat louder. Because with every new deal, every inch of growth, we were getting closer to Rentech, closer to them seeing me again, not as the discarded daughter, but as the force they underestimated. And I knew the moment was coming, not in a boardroom, not through some dramatic confrontation, but in the most poetic way possible, through business, through results, through the quiet power of becoming everything they said I couldn't be. And maybe, just maybe, more. The meeting was set for Thursday at 11 a.m., a cross-collaborative strategy summit between Rentech and select third-party logistics partners to review final proposals for their global expansion phase. That's what the email said: clean, corporate, forgettable. They had no idea what was coming, and that was the most exquisite part. Not because I wanted revenge, not anymore, but because I'd finally become untouchable. No begging, no anger, no need for recognition, just presence. And when you arrive without the need to prove anything, the room shifts. I wore navy, not red, not black, no sharp heels or watch me shine power blazer. Just a quiet, tailored pantsuit with soft lines and a single silver ring, the one my father gave me on my 21st birthday when he said, "You were born to build something bigger than I ever could." I remember that night now with a bittersweet ache, because he was right. He just didn't realize it would be without him. The conference center was sleek and impersonal. Glass walls, pale wood, echoing footsteps. I arrived early, took a seat at the long rectangular table, third chair from the left. Not at the head, not at the foot. Just present. Other executives filed in, some familiar faces. A few who looked at me with quiet recognition, connecting dots they hadn't dared piece together until now. Whispers floated through the air like static. "Is that... Wait, I thought she..." And then the door opened. He walked in. My father. Tan, polished, gray at the temples now. Jordan followed behind him, still wearing that practiced half smile, the one he learned from our father like it was part of the family code. They stopped mid-step when they saw me. It was subtle, a flicker of disbelief, quickly masked. But I saw it. That pause. That question behind his eyes. "What are you doing here?" And that's when I knew. He still didn't fully understand what was happening. The introductions began. A moderator from Rentech's strategic partnerships team welcomed everyone, explained the session goals, and invited each firm to present their final proposal. We were third on the list. I listened as others spoke. Detailed graphs, projections, cost benefits. All clean. All technical. Then my name was called. Amelia Wren, founder of Embark. The silence that followed was brief, but sharp. I stood, walked slowly to the front of the room, and when I turned to face the group, my eyes met his. Direct, steady, empty of apology. My presentation was simple. No grand theatrics, just clarity, precision, and vision. I outlined our phased integration model, highlighted our recent contract wins. I spoke of people, not just numbers, of culture, trust, fluidity in crisis. And when I ended, I didn't look at the board. I looked at him, my father, not with accusation, but with stillness. The kind of stillness that unsettles a man who's used to chaos. I returned to my seat without applause. It wasn't that kind of room. But the air had shifted, and everyone felt it. An hour later, the break came. Coffee, light pastries, small talk that tasted like obligation. I stood at the edge of the room, near the floor-to-ceiling window, watching the city hum beneath us. Then I felt him approach. His voice was lower now, controlled. "I didn't know you were involved." I turned, met his gaze. "No," I said. "You didn't ask." He exhaled slowly. "You've built something impressive." A pause. I let the silence stretch. Then gently, "You taught me how." He looked down at his coffee cup, then out the window, like the skyline might offer him a map out of this moment. And that's when I saw it. The thing I'd waited so long to witness. Not guilt, not shame, but recognition. Not of what he did to me, but of what he lost in the process. "You really went through with it," he said. His tone wasn't angry, just quiet. Hollow. I nodded. "I thought you'd come back," he added. "Eventually." I smiled. Small, but sincere. "I did come back," I said. "Just not for permission." His jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. And in that pause, I saw something flash behind his eyes. Not pride, not rage, just the mirror. He was looking at the version of me he could have supported, the partner I could have been, the empire we could have built together. If only he'd made room. If only he'd let go of the story where daughters must earn what sons inherit by default. He turned to leave, then stopped. "I never wanted to hurt you," he said, and I believed him. That was the saddest part, because he truly thought betrayal could be clean, that you could sell off a future and still expect holiday dinners. That legacy was a transaction, not a relationship. But I didn't need an apology. I didn't need anything from him anymore. So I gave him one line, the one he'd remember every time someone whispered my name in his boardroom. "You could have built it with me." He froze. That's what silence does when it carries truth. It lands harder than fury ever could. He looked at me, eyes wet, just slightly, then walked away. I turned back to the window. Max approached a few minutes later, handing me a coffee without asking. "You okay?" he murmured. I nodded, and for the first time in a long, long time, I meant it. Because the past no longer owned me. And the future? It was mine. The day after the summit, I walked through the old neighborhood where I grew up. It was quiet. Early morning, soft light spilling through the trees in long gold stripes. The kind of light that makes everything feel cinematic, even the cracks in the sidewalk. I passed the same bakery my mother used to take me to on Sundays. The same park where my brothers would play while I sat on a bench beside my dad, tracing his briefcase with my finger like it held the secrets to the universe. Everything looked smaller now. Not because it had changed, because I had. That afternoon, I cleaned out a box I hadn't touched since the collapse. Inside, an old Rentec notebook, a cracked photo frame, a letter I'd once written to my father, never sent. It was dated the night I found out he sold the company. I unfolded it. My handwriting was frantic, looping, desperate. I told him how much I'd given up for the dream, how invisible I felt, how gutted I was to be cast aside like I'd never mattered. I almost tossed it in the trash. But something made me pause. I read it again, slowly, gently, like I was listening to a younger version of myself. And for the first time, I didn't feel ashamed of her. I felt proud. Because she didn't stay bitter. She didn't let the story end there. She rose. I didn't send the letter. I burned it. Watched it curl into smoke on my balcony as the sun set behind the skyline I now helped shape. No tears. Just peace. Like exhaling something I'd been holding for far too long. A few weeks later, I got a call from my mother. She didn't ask for anything. She just said, "I saw the article in Forbes. Amelia, you looked powerful." I didn't know what to say, so I said, "Thank you." And that was enough. Maybe we'd never be close again. Maybe she'd never say the things I once needed to hear. But maybe we were both healing in our own way, quietly, imperfectly, at our own pace. Max and I spent a weekend in the mountains after the summit. No laptops, no calls, just long hikes and bare feet and wood smoke. One night, sitting by the fire, he said, "You don't talk about them much anymore." I nodded. "I don't think about them much anymore." He smiled. That's freedom. And I realized it was. Not forgetting, not pretending, just no longer being owned by what happened. I wasn't trying to win anymore. I had already won. Back in the city, we moved into a new office, all clean lines and tall windows and plants that actually stayed alive. On the wall of our conference room, I hung a framed quote. No name, no credit. Just 7 words. "You could have built it with me." not as a message to him, but as a reminder to myself of what I survived, of what I created, of who I had to become to get here. Now, when I wake up, I don't reach for my phone. I reach for breath, stillness, clarity. My days are quieter, lighter, full of meetings I choose and people I trust. Some mornings I run past the old Rentec building on purpose, not out of spite, but out of peace. Because there was a time I thought that place held my future. Now I know it simply shaped my past. They still don't say my name publicly. I'm not invited to family dinners. There are no apologies. And that's okay, because I no longer need anything from them to feel whole. I used to think power meant being seen. Now I know it means seeing yourself, clearly, fully, without flinching. If you'd told me a year ago that I'd be here, not on top, not at war, but somewhere in between, whole and awake, I would have laughed. But healing doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. And when it finally arrives, it doesn't ask for applause. It simply says, "You're free now.